A warm welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sophie Lambin, and I'm the editor partner for the Women's Forum for the Economy and Society. At the Women's Forum, we believe that women's voices and vision are crucial to building a more inclusive economy and society. In collaboration with the New York Times, we are delighted to be hosting a series of live conversations with women leaders. These conversations also reflect our desire to take aim at injustice and inequality, something that is critically needed as events in the US and worldwide clearly demonstrate. Our speakers are women from around the world, women on the front lines, women leading us through the crisis and through the recovery. Today, we'll hear from a speaker who fights for inclusion in the artificial intelligence that powers our world today, both in how it is made and how it is used. A quick note on audience questions. We'll be taking as many as we can through the live chat on the right of your screen. So please submit them and I will pass them through our moderator. You can also follow the conversation on social media with the hashtag #WomenForInclusion and in her words. And now I am pleased to welcome Shira Ovide, who writes on Tech with Shira Ovide newsletter for the New York Times. She will lead a discussion today with our amazing guest. Shira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for inviting us into your living rooms or wherever you may be this afternoon, morning, evening. I'm pleased to be here with Timnit, who's the co-lead of the ethical artificial intelligence team at Google. And I want to start by asking you for kind of a plain English, normal human explanation of what artificial intelligence is and isn't. Because it's one of those terms that we feel like we understand, but probably don't.
To be honest, the terms used changes all the time. So I'm going to tell you what I think it means right now and how I understand it at the moment. So artificial intelligence to me is trying to help machines understand the world, kind of like other entities like humans understand the world. And so that means, you have a bunch of things around you like images. So like computer vision, which is my specialty, tries to help machines make sense of imagery. Or language, so let's say translate and things like that. So natural language processing is the subsegment that tries to help machines understand language, robotics. And so to me, artificial intelligence is like this umbrella term. Some other people use it in a kind of a manner that is a little different. Sometimes they try to use it as like an entity, a being that is super intelligent or something like that. And so that's not how I define the term at the moment.
Okay, that's helpful. So give us an example of one place where you think artificial intelligence is being used in a way that's potentially beneficial to build a better world. And then I'm going to ask you about the bad stuff.
So for each thing that I tell you that's potentially beneficial, it could also be potentially harmful. So that's the thing, right? So there are things that maybe unilaterally you can say are harmful, but I think that one of the things that are difficult about understanding the benefits and harms of AI is like any technology. For each benefit that I tell you, there can also be harm, right? So for example, I think that perhaps things like melanoma detection in an automated way, or I saw this startup that built a really cheap ultrasound, and then that's portable, like costs like let's say $1,000 or less, rather than this huge machine that is portable and can be taken to rural places, and then people can learn, health workers can learn how to use it, and so it uses machine learning, which is a type, kind of a tool used in artificial intelligence. To teach people how maybe they can use the ultrasound. So I think that's, in healthcare, that could be one would use. My friend Kat Heller, who works on machine learning for health, has this thing called Sepsis Watch. that's helping patients, I believe, at Duke try and monitor sepsis, which I believe is a type of infection. So for each, there are so many potential beneficial applications, and there's other ones that I can talk about in agriculture too, and in many other ones. But then again, for each of these, there are ways in which they can be misused.
Okay, so talk to me about areas where you feel like you're most concerned about misuse of artificial intelligence in a way that could be harmful and detrimental.
So my own work has inadvertently kind of started being on face recognition and its potential misuses, and that was because I partnered up with Joy Bulamini, who's a researcher at MIT Media Lab, as a rock star, super famous now. You can even see her documentary called Coded Bias. And so in about 2015, she was talking about how open source face detection tools were not detecting her face. So she would put a white mask and they would detect her face, but then she wouldn't, they would detect her roommate's face, but they wouldn't detect her face. And she realized it was because she had darker skin. And so we decided to do this analysis in a more systematic way, and found that there were really high disparities in error rates especially between lighter skinned men and darker skinned women. So the results were much more accurate, almost no error for lighter skinned men, right? And so, for me, this was more like, let's say we were doing melanoma detection. Imagine something that just doesn't work for people of darker skin, which happens. There is this Twitter hashtag called Brown Skin Matters. And that shows you how, dermatology books and texts often describe various kinds of issues in relation to lighter skin and not darker skin. So people with darker skin can't get diagnosed. So for me, I was only thinking about it as, I hear in the background, New York.
Sorry, I live in New York City. It's just constant street noise. Apologies.
New York, must be New York. So for me, I initially started working on this as worried about the disparities in error rates. But then as I was working more and more in face recognition, I realized that even perfectly used face recognition can be completely misused. And given who I am a Black woman living in the US right now, who's dealt with racism. I mean, serious, consequences of racism. It's defined my whole life in the US, and who is now dealing with it, and it's center stage. You hear my dog in the background? Yeah, this is life right now. And so face recognition is being used against the Black community in many ways. So if you, I highly recommend for the audience, if they're interested, and because it's highly relevant right now, to read reports like the Perpetual Lineup report from Georgetown Law, follow things like the Algorithmic Justice League. So one example is that there was an example with the Baltimore police and the Freddie Gray marches, where they use face recognition to identify protesters. And then they try to link them up with their social media profiles and then target them for arrests later that are unrelated, right? There's so many examples like this. So right now, a lot of people are actually urging people not to put images of protesters on social media, because there are people out there whose job is just to look up these people and target them. And so,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all I was.
Well, I was just going to ask. It's very interesting because there's also obviously bias in human law enforcement, right? That the same way that a police officer could look at a video camera and look at mugshots and say, well, that's Jim Smith, right? So is software more biased than the bias that we know that humans have in law enforcement settings?
This is a very good question, and I'll answer it. I mean, I'm going to have to look at time because I can answer it for like an hour. But there are many parts of the question that you're asking. One is, if we just isolate the issue into the accuracy with which someone identifies someone else, is it the human more biased than the machine, right? And that depends. Like, some face recognition can be much more accurate, Some can be not very accurate. So we showed that actually for us, it was way, way less accurate than humans, right? Like we were looking, so there was no question whether it was more accurate than humans or not. But the other issue is something that is called automation bias. So what happens is not only do humans, so for example, Laura Moy is someone at Georgetown Law who talked about this. People trust algorithms so much, and then they misuse them even in ways that they're not meant to be used, that they can just, even if your intuition tells you that doesn't look like Smith, the model tells you that is Smith with 99% accuracy, you're going to be more likely to believe that model. So this is called automation bias. I mean, there's many studies I can talk about, especially by Ayanna Howard at Georgia Tech, who's done studies like this on robots. So the combination of just overtrust, misuse, lack of documentation, lack of transparency, we don't even know how widespread this is very dangerous one. Second one I want to talk about is the imbalance of power. So one of the reasons I think we're seeing so much activity right now is because in the Black community, we have known this has been going on for so long. I tell people about my experiences, and there's so much just disbelief, I tell them about the time when I called the police to help me and my friend who was assaulted. Literally, I was being strangled by people. They took pictures, of her throat and all that. Do you know what they did? They put handcuffs on her. They put handcuffs on my friend after I called them to help us, right? When I'm telling people this story, a lot of the people around me at the time, like 5 years ago, let's say, because there's been protests and I was trying to educate, they would try to make stuff like maybe, oh, they must have had a reason. She must have been acting crazy. You know what I mean? Like they would say stuff like this. Why is it now that I think we're seeing more activity? Because many people have smartphones. Many people are videotaping what's going on. So there's a little bit more of a balance of power, right? With face recognition right now, a certain group of people, certain institutions can use it on other groups of people the way they see fit at scale, right? So if all law enforcement officials and police departments that have been known to be racist in the US, right? Like we know the history of the police. I'm really not holding back right now. I think this is why everybody's protesting. We've had enough, right? I'm not going to mince words about it. So these institutions are being given much more power, right, to deploy these systems on protesters, on vulnerable groups of people who've already been oppressed. So it's not just about whether or not there's bias and accuracy. So this can be completely accurate, 100% accurate in terms of the example I gave you with Baltimore police, but it could still be used in a way that is detrimental to certain groups of people.
That totally makes sense. Do you think that there's an opportunity to use AI, or AI in particular, not necessarily facial recognition, to help spot police abuses? So the CEO of Axon, which you may know is the company that makes a lot of the body cameras used by police departments, he suggested recently that the video camera footage could be analyzed by the company to spot kind of persistent patterns of police abuses. Do you feel like that's a good use of AI?
So in that specific example, I don't know very much about what he said there, but my gut feeling, my gut reaction is that the community has been working on, dozens and dozens of ways to reform police. And I don't think this is one of the things that they're talking about. So just listen to Black people, listen to Black activists, let's not do tech solutionism, which is, if I thought all AI was bad and I'm working in the field, that would just be ridiculous and very hypocritical on my part. But at the same time, in these kinds of situations, a lot of people in technology have the kind of, I think, the urge to just go to a tech solution without listening to all of these people who have been working with community leaders and police and all sorts of people who are, proposing solutions. In terms of can AI be used to spot, so sometimes I think that when you back up when you show clear evidence of the things that we've been saying for so long, it might help. So just like it helped to videotape some of these injustices, and even still people say stuff. Police pushed this guy And he he hit his head. And I still see, people saying, police reports saying that he tripped and fell or something like that, even when we're seeing the video. But one example, so anyways, because it can be backed up, when you back something up by data and evidence, it could be helpful. One example of that, actually, this is a project I'm working on right now. I started working on it a while ago with my colleagues, and right now it's becoming more difficult to even concentrate on this project, is to analyze, news articles of describing police-involved fatalities. We know in the Black community that when there is a news article involving a Black person, and they paint them very differently when there is a news article involving a Black person and a white person, some sort of crime. So take the Stanford swimmer, whatever kind of incident, right? So exactly Stanford swimmer, right? That's like, oh, this guy was a swimmer, that you have a particular type of picture for him, particular type of language that's used. And we know for the Black people, it's a certain different kind of language that's used, certain kind of, different kinds of photos, right? That doesn't elicit empathy. And so the question is, can we analyze this at scale and show that this is true? Same as what we did with Joy. We knew that from her experience that these automated facial analysis tools were not detecting darker skin. And we had a hunch for why this is the case, right? But we showed it at a larger scale and we were able to make more of a case. That's one example, right? And so can we do more examples like this? And actually that work resulted in changes in laws, I would say, right? Like San Francisco banned face recognition and all that. With law enforcement. So I think there is a way to do these things, but you just have to take the context into account and not jump into, saying that this technology is the solution.
So what do you think are good solutions, particularly for use of facial recognition by law enforcement or other authorities? Is there a way to do it right now in a responsible way, or should it just not be used the way, as you mentioned, San Francisco has been the biggest city that banned facial recognition used by law enforcement?
Right now, it should be banned at the moment. I'm not sure. I don't know about the future, but for example, just going back to the Georgetown law, the people from Georgetown law that I talk about, the Center for Privacy and Security, they are my go-to people for analyzing or learning about how automated facial analysis tools are being used in the country, in the US. That is by ICE, Immigration's Customs Enforcement, or police, or many other entities, right? And so when they first came out with this report in 2016, they asked for regulation. They didn't ask for a moratorium in the use of face recognition. But when they in the follow-up report, when they came up with the report in 2019, when they did a more extensive report, they asked for a moratorium because the way in which I'm not muted, right?
Sorry again for that sound.
Oh,
I don't know what's happening.
Is someone having a party? Any good thing right now is good. Like anybody having fun is a good thing, But so when they came out with this report in 2019, they asked for a moratorium, right? So you can see our increased understanding of how it's being used. Right now I think it needs to be banned because it's not being used in a manner that's helping us. And I just want to add, I don't know if you wanted to ask another question, but I want to add that many times when I talk about face recognition, people say, what about helping prevent crimes? What about, crimes? And Black people in this country have been criminalized for a very long time. So when people say crime, I'm saying, which crime are you talking about? Crime, the definition of crime is very different. So it certainly has not been used to identify some of the biggest injustices I think are going on here, which is the oppression of Black and brown people. That's a huge part of crime, right? So face recognition is not being used to do that. And one of the biggest civil rights leaders of our time, Michelle Alexander, wrote actually a New York Times op-ed talking about how when you criminalize someone, you dehumanize them, and you make it such that the public is okay with anything that happens to them. And so she was telling us to learn from what's been happening to Black people in the way immigrants are being dehumanized and put in detention centers and things like that. So so again, when people say, oh, what about, you know, preventing crime and all that, it's like, well, you know, think about who is generally criminalized and be seen as a criminal.
What about we had a good question, I think, from the audience about kind of the flip side of some of these potential abuses of AI, which is, are there ways of redistributing power in who has access to AI and then using AI to distribute power to people who have typically, historically, had less?
That's a good question. I think that, for example, so there are some kinds of segments or specialties of AI that I'm really interested in. One is, for example, using low resources. And so it's interesting, you know, me being at Google saying this, but so if you look at fast.ai, it's one of my favorite examples. It's their motto is making deep learning uncool again. So deep learning is, again, a specific type of tool that's gotten very popular in the recent times. And the reason it resurfaced and got really popular is because when they worked on it before, they didn't have so much data. So just like humans, right? A segment of AI that's called machine learning, the way you teach machines how to understand the world could be by giving them lots and lots of data and teaching them how to make sense of this data, right? So the deep learning works. It turns out that like when you give it a lot more data, it works a lot better. So they figured this out in like 2012 or something. That, in addition to other resources like GPUs or something like that. So now some people, you know, so then what happens is that like the people with lots and lots of data and lots of compute can, you know, use this technology much better than the people with not lots and lots of data and not lots and lots of compute. And so you know, AI with low resources means, how about, you know, with working on machine learning techniques with less data and less compute? What about the, you know, techniques for that? So, for example, my colleague Ernest and I worked on this project for cassava disease, identifying cassava disease. So cassava is a carbohydrate that's basically, I guess, consumed in 80% of sub-Saharan Africa, right? And so this helps farmers use this kind of thing on their phone to surveil cassava disease, right? But when you develop stuff like this, you have to, like the audience member said, empower the community. I mean, let's not be saviors. Let's not try to just kind of like do the thing for them and then give it to them. I see this happening all the time in like international development or something like that. So if you co-design this models or algorithms and work with them and to see what works for them and empower them as well, then that works. And so for me, I co-founded this group called Black in AI specifically to do that kind of thing, right? To empower people in my community. And then we also have this, you know, thing called a class called Addis Coder with my friend, where we teach algorithms to students in Ethiopia. It's a 1 month, very intense algorithm class. So yes, definitely, I definitely believe in empowering as many people as possible in this world, so that the balance of power is a little bit, you know, less unequal.
So I'm going to ask the kind of standard last question for these sessions, which is, given all that we've discussed, what needs to happen, in your view, to help build a better world?
Well, so much needs to happen, but
small question.
Yeah. I mean, you know, but because this is a women's forum, let me maybe talk about women, right? Women, I mean, I think we make up basically the majority of the world, right? We're more than 50% of the world's population. And we are mostly oppressed in many, I mean, in all parts. It just depends on the way in which that oppression is manifested. When historically, many Black women have felt that the feminist movement has ignored them completely. They didn't feel part of the feminist movement at all. And so if we're going to advocate for all women, we have to have an intersectional view, right? So what does that mean? Let's not just advocate for the 1% of women who have more resources or anything like that. It means advocating for Black lives, advocating for trans lives, advocating for women with disabilities, right? And so otherwise, we're going to end up just kind of leaving out everybody except for maybe 5% of women. So I think my biggest message would be, when we say women, let's expand our understanding of what we mean and make sure that we're not leaving other women behind. So whether it's in technology, whether it's in anything, in policy, we have to make sure to bring women from all walks of life at the table and pass the mic, like let them speak, right? Let's not try to speak for them. So that would be my closing message.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a great chat, and I really appreciate everybody's attention and great questions.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Timnit. Thank you, Shira, for this great conversation today. I think you've given us a really good reminder that it's really about power. AI can be good, can be bad. It's a choice we make on how we decide to use and deploy those resources. And at the Women's Forum, we're working with our partners to really promote a design of AI that is inclusive by design, and in fact encouraging companies to put the practices in place, the training in place, and the governance in place to really be thoughtful about this. So if people are interested to look on the Women's Forum website, we have a call to action for companies to think deeply about that and the implication of this. So thank you so much for this great conversation. For our audience, if you have missed anything, or if you wish your friends was there with you watching it, a recording of this conversation will be available here very soon. Later this week, we'll have also a conversation with Chelsea Clinton, co-chair of the Clinton Foundation, together with public health Professor Devi Sridhar. So look out for that conversation later in the week. In the interim, let me thank you again, Timnit and Shira, for this insightful exchange, and I wish you all a very nice evening and afternoon. Thank you. I think we are offline.